History is all around us. There are secrets of our past around every corner, hidden in our streets, buried under our feet. And in this series, I'm going to uncover those secrets by exploring Britain's most historic towns. You're in my way! Get out of the way! I want to find out which towns across the UK can reveal the most about each period in British history. That sent shivers down my spine. Yeah. That's amazing. I'll be deciphering clues in familiar landscapes, bringing lost landmarks back to life, and turning back the clock to reveal how these towns looked at key stages in their history. You shouldn't be in here, should you? From the Stuarts to the Edwardians, the Plantagenets to the Civil War, I'll reveal the story of an era through the story of a single town. This week, it's the English Civil War.
That's a good shot.
I've come to a city that was at the heart of a vicious battle between an authoritarian king and his rebellious parliament, that was centre stage in a war that split the nation, becoming a capital city to threaten mighty London, and a city that was under siege during the battles that would change British warfare forever. If you really want to understand the English Civil War, then Oxford is the place to be. Oxford is famous for its beautiful university and for punting, so I thought I should have a go. With its picturesque colleges, its neatly laid out quadrangles and its cobbled alleyways, it attracts thousands of international tourists and students. And it's just so serene and idyllic today on the river. But in the middle of the 17th century, Oxford was thrust into the limelight and into the centre of the action as the country was ripped apart by civil war. And this city became the alternative capital. The English Civil War started in 1642 and played out over 9 years. At its heart was a deep divide between an autocratic King Charles I and his parliament. Before the Civil War, King Charles had already been at loggerheads with his MPs for years. He believed he was appointed by God and could rule how he pleased. Parliament believed the king should listen to their concerns. But Charles enraged MPs by dismissing them and raising taxes without involving them. Adding to the volatile atmosphere, it was also a time of deep religious tension. Some members of Parliament had embraced a Puritan form of Protestantism. They believed that the king was dangerously Catholic in his beliefs and a threat to the very soul of the nation. I really want to understand why the Civil War broke out in the first place. What precipitated this crisis? I'm hoping Professor Justin Champion can explain. So you've got this powder keg. How does it turn into a civil war? Surely these people of power had too much to lose.
Well, the final moments of breakdown are when Charles I loses his temper. He's petulant. He's had enough of this recalcitrant group of parliamentarians, and he believes he has the right to detain any parliamentarian threatening the authority and sovereignty of the king. So he tries to send his troops in to Parliament to capture what he regards as the most devious of plotters. And famously, as the troops come in, the 5 MPs run out the back.
So has he walked into Parliament with troops then?
Yes.
To take these people?
Yes. And from that moment on, as soon as the shout goes out from the House of Commons that the king has tried to make an attempt on the 5 members, this is threatening everybody's liberty. So the whole of London erupts. Charles has to flee the capital. Yeah. And from that moment on, you can see the the sort of countdown to military battle.
News that the king has had to flee London spreads like wildfire. People all over the country are forced to choose which side of the battle they're on. Do you support Parliament with its vision of a strictly Protestant England, or the king who believes in his divine right to rule? The Royalists or Cavaliers backed the king. Fighting against them were the Parliamentarians or Roundheads. The battle for the future of England had begun. Support for the Parliamentarians came largely from towns in the south and east of England, areas where trade boomed. Royalist support was mostly across the countryside in the north and west. Charles's goal was to retake London. He needed a royalist capital close to his target and set his sights on affluent Oxford. Charles I ended up in Oxford. This town became the base for his war against the Roundheads. But was it really a strategic position to be in? Well, I'm hoping that our aerial archaeologist Ben Robinson will be able to answer that.
Oxford's looking beautiful today. Visibility is fantastic, and I'm getting a great sense of where it sits in the landscape as well. Oxford was a great place to be for the Royalist Army. It could control the western counties that were largely sympathetic. Armies could foray out into the Midlands, but it also occupied an ideal defensive position as well, and that's what I'm getting a sense of here. The River Thames snaking round the west side, and we've got the Cherwell, a slightly lesser river, snaking round the east side here, and Oxford's sort of in the crook of the Y that those two rivers form. So effectively the town's enveloped by this moat. You only have to defend the north and you've got a pretty impregnable fortification here. But the other important thing is that Oxford was very well positioned to launch an attack on London. For someone on horseback, maybe only a day's ride. So Oxford really threatens London, and London was the key prize.
On the 29th of October 1642, Charles arrived into Oxford riding at the head of his troops, and he was met right here at Carfax, the crossroads. King Charles was a man who loved a bit of pomp and ceremony, and with his army behind him, he was cheered on by supporters from the city's staunchly royalist colleges. Oxford was about to be transformed. Charles now had a new capital from which he could wage war against his enemies. The king and his royal court need somewhere palatial to stay. This'll do, Christ Church College. Christ Church is one of Oxford's largest colleges, and with its stunning architecture and refined grounds, it's easy to see why a king addicted to splendour chose it as his Oxford base. This is the Great Hall at Christ Church College, and it looks somewhat familiar, and that's because it was the inspiration for the dining hall in a certain school that was attended by a young, bespectacled wizard. But this is also where Charles I met his first parliament outside of London, and he would have entered with trumpets playing. I'm keen to see where the king actually stayed at Christ Church. Writer and historian Professor Diane Purkis has agreed to show me round. Hello.
Hey, welcome to Christ Church.
Thank you, what a beautiful morning. King Charles must have felt very at home, I think, arriving here.
I think that's right. It's such an incredibly palace-like college, and this college in particular was one of the largest. And it's obviously got plenty of room for his vast court.
So do we know where he actually stayed within the college?
Yes, he stayed in the deanery,
Yeah.
which was obviously the poshest accommodation that the college could find.
Yeah. So Charles I would have been in here?
Yes, This would have been his main reception room,
Yeah.
if you like. And there he is in his suit of armour, looking extremely warlike.
Did he do much fighting?
At the time when he first settled in here, he hadn't done much fighting. Because, honestly, though kings sometimes led their armies, they didn't really do their own generaling very much. The idea of a king doing his own kind of military planning and thinking would be a bit like a king cleaning his own shoes or doing his own washing up. Charles had generals for that. That was the point of them. Charles believed he couldn't lose the war because he believed that God had chosen him to be king.
He must have had some kind of plan, though. I mean, he's here in Oxford, presumably hunkering down for the winter. He must have had a plan of what he was going to do the following year.
He definitely had a plan, and it went like this. My generals are going to sweep the rebels into the sea. That was the plan.
That was the plan.
That was the plan. And everybody will eventually come over to my side. That was the plan.
Despite the bitter struggle that had divided his kingdom, Charles was keen to keep up the flashy displays of life in a royal court. Why let a thing like civil war get in the way of a little royal relaxation? And this was one of his favourite pastimes. Andy, is it safe?
It's safe, it's safe.
Hi, I've come to play the sport of kings. And this is it, isn't it?
You're in the right place. This game's traditionally been played by royalty for centuries.
This is real tennis, and it has a long association with the royals. Henry VIII was a regular player, and Elizabeth I a keen spectator. This is such a strange court, isn't it? I mean, it's like a cross between a squash court and a tennis court.
Absolutely. So the ball has to come over the net,
Yeah.
but we can play the ball back off all the walls. You can hit it as high as you like, as long as it doesn't hit the ceiling or the windows. But anything else goes, basically.
OK, well, I can't wait to have a go, but I think I should change into some suitable attire. It was almost unheard of for women to play real tennis in the 17th century, so I'm dressing as a man in an outfit similar to what King Charles might have worn. Right.
Let me give you that.
OK.
That's a winning shot. Well played.
Oh, I can imagine Charles I doing this then. Getting rid of a bit of pent-up energy.
Good shot.
Whiling away the time while the town itself was under siege. It's an indication of Charles's arrogant approach to the conflict engulfing his nation that during the Civil War, one of his actions was to arrange a special pass to allow a courier to bring up his bespoke tennis outfit from the enemy capital, London.
Good. And that's an ace. That is a brilliant serve. That's your best serve so far.
Oh, good game, thank
Well
you.
played, Alice. Very well played.
I'm a bit hot though, aren't
Same
you?
here, same here.
Can't wait to get out of the doublet and hose. This is a great game. There's a madness to it. It's fun. I can see why Charles I enjoyed it. And, you know, you've got to keep fit if you're in a city that's under siege. But there is an element of this that is a bit like fiddling while Rome burns. I'm in Oxford. During the English Civil War, the extravagant King Charles I made this town his capital in the bitter struggle against his Roundhead enemies. It was a clash between the old royalist loyalties and Parliament's desire for reform. England was being torn apart along religious and political lines. The Civil War played out as a whole series of skirmishes as parliamentarians and royalists across the country clashed with each other. The first major battle was fought at Edgehill in Warwickshire, and this whole conflict was characterised by a new form of warfare, completely transformed by the introduction of novel military technology. Sealed knot. That's what they do on their weekends. The Sealed Knot are England's oldest reenactment society, dedicated to bringing the Civil War back to life. Mike, that was amazing. Now, tell me about Civil War warfare. I mean, this must have been a relatively new weapon.
I mean, the musket was cutting-edge technology during the English Civil War.
And presumably this replaced longbows.
Yes, this was revolutionary of its time. Up until that point, a longbowman had to spend years training to get the upper body strength and the skill.
Yeah.
You could stick this in the hand of somebody and train them for a couple of days and then put them on a battlefield. That's certainly what happened during the English Civil War. Raw recruits being thrown straight into battle.
Do we have any idea of how many people were killed through the use of musket fire?
The majority of people who died on an from an English Civil War battle died afterwards. They died from their wounds.
Right, yeah.
Because it was very easy for wounds to become infected, particularly if you're being hit by a musket ball. It's tearing through your coat, it's got dirt attached to it. So infection was the biggest killer of soldiers in the Civil War.
OK then, Mike, you're a parliamentarian. You've got a pretty big gun. I'm going to join your side.
OK, well, if we're going to do that, we definitely need to get you into uniform.
OK.
So in here, we have your obligatory linen shirt, which was not only a shirt but underwear as well, so you'd pretty much never take that off.
It's got a big one.
Yeah.
I'm not that fat.
Believe me, this isn't necessarily flattering on anybody. And then that would identify what regiment you were in by the colour of the coat.
Excellent.
And the colour of the cuffs and the collar as well.
Lovely.
And you'd always have to have your head covered at all times, just for decency's sake.
OK, yeah.
So we've got you
Very indecent.
a very authentic
Is
bobble
it?
hat. Yeah,
Is
this
it?
is based on a hat that was found in Copenhagen from the 1630s.
A bobble hat?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Absolutely. So,
How does it work?
it's very simple. It's a tube with two holes in the end. Big one here, little one down there.
Right.
You'll see that just here, there is a pan. This holds a charge of gunpowder.
Yeah.
And can you see the little hole that runs through into the gun?
I certainly can.
The gunpowder will go through there
Yeah.
to the gunpowder that I'm going to put inside.
Right.
And you
yeah.
take a piece of match. This is slow match.
That's not a match, that's a piece of rope.
It's called slow match,
Is
which
it?
burns nice and slow and steady because you want a smouldering end of this rope
Yeah.
to put it into your serpent, so-called because of its shape,
Is
which
it?
is connected to the trigger.
So that ignites the gunpowder in the pan,
Yep.
and then that then travels through into the barrel,
Yep.
and then it blows the gunpowder out, and if there's a musket ball in there,
Yeah.
it comes out too.
Yes. That's the plan.
OK.
The musket may have changed the face of warfare, but it was prone to problems, failing to fire or even blowing up with devastating results.
After your first shot. Well, of course, the proof is whether you can be an English Civil War musketeer is to fire one of these, a
Oh,
lead
right.
musket ball. Now, we're not going to do it by anybody else because that's obviously quite dangerous.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is we're going to move somewhere safe and make sure nobody else is around so that you can see what that was like.
To get a sense of the destructive power of a musket, I'm going to fire at a watermelon.
Put that in the crook of your shoulder,
Yeah.
all right?
And because I'm dressed as a parliamentarian, this is a royalist watermelon.
And when I say give fire,
Yeah.
you squeeze that trigger.
OK.
Ready?
Yes.
And give fire! Three! Brilliant.
Where's the melon?
It's on the floor.
So it's completely destroyed a watermelon. Yeah, it's gone through there, and then I can see a small hole through these. Yeah, and it's gone through the foam there, and that's it. So that's where my musket ball exited, smashing its way through that ply. It's just astonishing. I mean, that would go through several bodies.
Yeah.
This transforms warfare.
The musket had intensified the brutality of the battlefield. The Civil War was no gentlemanly affair. Like all wars, it was nasty, filthy, and brutish. But it wasn't just on the battlefield where the hardship of war was felt.
This is the Bodleian Library. It's one of the oldest libraries in Europe and contains some of the most valuable books in the world. Also a load of old documents, and I'm hoping that there's one in particular that can shed light on the impact of the arrival of Charles in Oxford on the lives of ordinary people.
I'm meeting Dr. Catherine Murphy to find out more.
Katie,
Hello. Hi.
Is this
This is it. This is the book.
Ooh,
Come and have a look.
exciting. And this is an original document.
Yeah, and what it is, if you look at the heading up here, it says an exact account of all persons being strangers now resident within the parish of St Aldate's. So what it is a census of all the people that are living in a particular parish of Oxford, so just one area around one street, who are not citizens of Oxford.
Right.
But they're billeted with the townsfolk.
Yeah.
So most of these houses would already have had maybe about 5 or 6 people living in them.
Yeah.
And then the king comes to town. And with the king come evacuees from other parts of war-torn England, soldiers, and the hangers-on of the courts. So, for example, Mistress Sparks, who is a tire maker, and that doesn't mean that she makes tires, it means that she makes attire, and specifically wigs. So she makes periwigs. And if you imagine the kind of extremely elaborate hair of the period.
Yeah.
But there are also various barbers.
Somebody down here. Yeah. Mr. Is that Napper?
Napper, yeah.
The Prince's barber.
And here we have a French lord, Monsieur de Saint-Paul, and his brother with 2 manservants. And they have ended up lodged in Oxford.
With Susan Smith.
With Susan Smith,
Widow.
a widow.
Yeah. So, would Susan Smith have been paid to have these extra
They would
lodgers?
have been promised payment, which they never then received.
So if you were to extrapolate from this to the whole of Oxford, what was the expansion in population at this time?
Before the war, and before the king came to Oxford, there were between 8,000 and 10,000 people in the city. And then afterwards, there are at least 3,000, and sometimes probably more, who come into the city and come and lodge here.
It does give you a real insight into, I think, the way that Oxford must have been transformed during those years.
Absolutely, yeah.
The population of Oxford would increase by 50% during the Civil War. But it wasn't just the influx of people who came with the king that transformed the town. Oxford needed to be able to withstand invasion. It needed defences.
The king issued a proclamation ordering the people of Oxford to build the fortifications around the city, and here it is. He says every person above the age of 16 and under the age of 60 inhabiting or residing for the present in the University or City of Oxford shall once in every week either work in person or, if they don't, pay 12 pence for such a default. And then it says this is the way that the fortifications should be dug until they're fully finished, in this manner: that an hour before 6 in the morning, the government shall appoint one drummer to call the workmen to their work, and to continue at the works until 11 before noon, and a drummer do the like of 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and continue until 6 at night to encourage the workers at the work. I better go and get on with it.
From November 1642, the Royalists embarked on an ambitious scheme of defences. Fortifications were to be built to protect Oxford, the King's new Royalist capital, from attack by his Roundhead enemies.
I'm just approaching the Westgate Shopping Centre, and although there's nothing to see here today, the fortifications of the Civil War came up through the road there and then underneath these shops.
The fortifications encircling the city are earth banks with a deep ditch and wooden spikes protecting the outer side. On top are heavy artillery cannons. As well as these defences, buildings across the city are transformed by the presence of the king. New Hall Inn College becomes a mint, the Bodleian Library a warehouse and repair depot. Small arms and gunpowder are stored at New College, and heavy ordnance and repair sheds fill Magdalen Grove. This once prosperous and peaceful city is now a royal stronghold and garrison at war. I'm in Oxford. If you scratch the surface of this beautiful city, you uncover the key role it played in the English Civil War. Dictatorial King Charles's defiance against his reform-hungry Parliament had torn the country apart. Oxford was bursting at the seams. The population had exploded as it became the king's base for his army and royal court. I think that when King Charles and his entourage and his army arrive in Oxford, massively swelling the population, that would have produced a huge strain on the already fragile infrastructure in the city. And I want to understand the effect of that on the ordinary inhabitants of Oxford. So I'm going to look at some very particular evidence dating right back to the time of the Civil War. And I'm also meeting up with an old friend. Louise! Long time no see! Oh my God! And what have we got here? We've got a Civil War skeleton.
Yeah, would you like to have a look?
Yeah. I've specialised in the study of human bones, and it was archaeologist Dr. Louise Lowe who first taught me to lay out a skeleton. These bones can provide us with a valuable insight into how people in Oxford suffered in a town that was stretched to breaking point during the Civil War. She's a young woman, late teens, early 20s. It's an unusual time to die. Have you seen anything in her skeleton which might be a clue as to what finished her off?
We've looked really carefully at every bone. In particular, we were looking for evidence of trauma, which is something that might explain a sudden death in young adulthood.
Yeah, so any injuries? Are there any sign?
No injuries on her at all.
No.
There's no evidence to suggest why she died at such a young age.
And what about the time of her death? Do we know when she died and when she was buried?
Well, we know from the coins that we found with her that she dates to at least 1640.
So she could quite possibly have died during the time of the Civil War while Oxford was under siege.
Indeed, she could, yes.
So I suppose that makes us think about the types of diseases that she would have been exposed to.
Yeah, well, we know that at the time of the Civil War, there was an epidemic of typhus.
And it typically affects places where conditions are overcrowded and you've got poor sanitary conditions at the same time.
That's right.
Yeah.
And interestingly, we also know that in 1643, the local parish church was so overwhelmed with people to bury because they were dying suddenly that they had to close the burial ground.
Oh, really? So that could explain why she's buried in a garden then?
It's a possibility.
I mean, if she did die of typhus, that would certainly explain why there's no mark left on the skeleton. It's something that kills you really quickly. We can treat it now with antibiotics, but of course in the Civil War, there were no antibiotics, no such treatment existed.
That's right, and it's all coming together to suggest that this is our preferred interpretation at the moment.
Yeah, it looks like it was typhus who done it.
Yep.
The discovery of a skeleton with a coin that can help date it so precisely is rare. And if this woman did indeed die from typhus, she wasn't alone. In the summer of 1643, as many as 40 people a week were dying of typhus in Oxford. The war dragged on, and it seemed as though there was little hope of any resolution. By May 1644, parliamentarian troops had reached Oxford. They were on the outskirts and they lay siege to the town, preventing any basic supplies from entering. By the end of the war, Oxford would have been besieged 3 times. But its experience as a royalist stronghold under siege was by no means unique. Other royalist towns, York, Chester, Worcester, Hereford, all suffered the same fate. Andrew Hopper is a professor of local history and is going to help me understand just what it was like living in a town under siege during the English Civil War.
Oxford is very much at the centre of things. The king is here with his court and holds parliament here, and it becomes besieged. But there are other cities that become besieged during the Civil War as well.
Absolutely. The siege or an attack on a fortified strongpoint is the characteristic action, military action, in the Civil Wars. There was a whole network of rival garrisons spread like tentacles across England and Wales as those garrison forces tried to extract provisions and finance and support out of reluctant civilian populations. So there was a lot of raiding and counter-raiding and lots of sieges. So siege warfare, like the sieges here at Oxford, were much more characteristic civilian experience of the Civil War.
Yeah,
because Oxford suffered a population catastrophe because of the royalist occupation of this city. So every household would have lost someone.
Yeah.
About a fifth of the population were lost during the king's time here.
And when it was all over, what had been the toll?
Well, historians now would say that the population loss is about double that of the First World War,
Really?
if you look at it as a
Yeah.
percentage of the population.
That's extraordinary.
I consider the Civil War as the greatest human catastrophe ever suffered in the British Isles, perhaps after the Black Death.
And if war, overcrowding and disease weren't devastating enough, things were about to get even worse for the people of Oxford.
This is George Street. Now, back in the time of the Civil War, it was known as Broken Haze, and it was in a house on this street that in 1644 a fire broke out, which would devastate a great swathe of Oxford.
The blaze takes hold, and very quickly the back buildings between Cornmarket and New Inn Hall Street are on fire. The fire continues southwards all the way down to the Thames. But instead of trying to fight the fire, royalist soldiers are ordered to man the defences for fear that the parliamentarians will seize this opportunity to launch an attack. When the fire finally dies, it has been burning for more than 10 hours and the flames have spread for over half a mile. Later reports estimated 330 houses were burnt down, affecting up to a quarter of the population of Oxford.
By 1645, the tide was turning against the king and his royalist supporters, but Oxford was still holding strong. Meanwhile, a certain figure was rising to prominence among the ranks of the parliamentarians.
Oliver Cromwell was committed to Puritanism, a form of particularly staunch and austere Protestantism. As an MP, he'd opposed the king's more flamboyant religious worship. During the Civil War, Cromwell had risen rapidly through the military ranks. He played a key role as the Roundheads drew the king's army into a battle at Naseby, south of Leicester. After 3 hours, the Royalists were defeated. The Roundhead victory would prove a bitter blow to the king.
The Royalists had lost the battle. London was still in the hands of the parliamentarians. Charles was running out of money and his army was weakened and disgruntled. And here he was, holed up in Oxford, which had seemed such a safe, strategic place to be. But now it was turning into a trap, as Ben Robinson can see from the skies.
So Oxford, a great position to defend, a difficult position to attack. But what if you just wanted to sit it out? And that's exactly what happened during sieges. The parliamentarian forces cut off the town. They had their own rings of defences. They could take pot shots into the town. The Royalist army could do nothing. They could not risk breaking out in a direct confrontation. They were sitting ducks.
Pressure was mounting. When Oxford became besieged for the third time, the king was left with no choice. At 3 o'clock in the morning on the 27th of April, 1646, he fled Oxford, shorn of his trademark pointy beard and heavily disguised. He escaped across Magdalen Bridge. He would never return to his adopted capital again. With the king abandoning Oxford, the town would be left to an uncertain fate. Whilst across the country, people were about to get a taste of the victorious Cromwell's Puritan vision.
You seem like the whore of Babylon.
The Civil War had devastated towns and cities across England and traumatised the country. Here in Oxford, the King's royalist capital, the suffering had been great. By 1646, the king had fled Oxford and the outlook seemed bleak for the royalists. After 4 years of fighting, the tide had turned against the king's forces and towns soon began to fall to the parliamentarians. The royalists only had control of pockets of North Wales and the southwest. The rest of the country was in the hands of the Roundheads. Oxford was surrounded. King Charles was on the run and running out of places to hide. Marston is a quiet, pretty little village on the outskirts of Oxford, but during the Civil War, it was swarming with Roundheads. And if events had played out here differently, then Oxford as we know it might not have existed. I'm meeting historian Justin Champion again at a rather unique house in the village. No, it's wonderful, and it's amazing to think that Cromwell himself was in this house. So what exactly happened here?
Well, this is where the parliamentarian armies, led by Cromwell and a few others, and the royalist equivalents, settled the surrender of Oxford in June 1646.
How come they ended up meeting here in Marston, and what was the meeting like?
The meeting was very, very civilised. They came here because it was just outside of the city walls. This was the end of quite a lot of negotiation, and both sides, in one sense, were doing it for their best interest. Nobody wanted to see the whole of Oxford smashed and slaughtered. They may be divided by the sword, but they were going to sort out the problems and preserve that which needed preserving, the integrity of the old university.
And what do you think would have happened to the city if they hadn't managed to reach an agreement here?
Well, I think we know from some of the other sieges around the UK, the result could be bloody mayhem.
And meanwhile, where was Charles? What was his part in this?
Well, Charles has already decided he's making a flight up north. He gives himself up to the Scots in the hope that they will support him, but the Scots do the dirty and give him back to Parliament.
The king was imprisoned. He was put on trial for treason and found guilty. On January the 30th, 1649, in one of the most dramatic moments in British history, King Charles was beheaded. For the first time in almost 1,000 years, the country had no monarch. After 2 more years of conflict, the royalists accepted defeat and the fighting was finally over. England was now a republic, with an all-powerful Cromwell soon to be installed as Lord Protector. But the country was in for a shock as a new code of conduct was imposed across the land. This was a Puritan age of moral austerity, and one that would even be felt on the most special day of the year. I'm meeting historian Diane Purkis again to get some pointers in the do's and don'ts of how to behave in Cromwell's Puritan Republic. I've gone all a bit 17th century, Diane, and I'm looking forward to this amazing feast.
Alice, I can hardly bear to tell you this, but we can't dress and behave as we used to, and I'm afraid you'll have to change into something much more appropriate.
And then I can come back and have some food, have a feast.
You can come back.
Okay. Right. Now I'm ready for dinner.
You're not planning to eat this, though, are you?
Absolutely.
But this is a Christmas feast from the past. Delicious Christmas feasts like this have been specifically outlawed by the Directory of Public Worship.
Well, do I look like a good Puritan now, then, at least?
Well, I think there are a couple of issues that we still need to resolve. Your jewellery, to start with, it's showing, and it wasn't created by God. It was created by human beings. It's a vanity to have it there. And your hair? Remember, this is a fast day when we all show our devotion to God and really live our lives as plainly as possible. Oh, that's great. Oh, wait, maybe it isn't. Is your face painted?
A little.
Oh my goodness. Don't you realise that to your Puritan neighbours that will make you seem like the whore of Babylon? Yes.
Honestly?
Face painting is a lie. Okay. It's a lie that besmirches God's truth. Here. Oh, that's better.
So what did Cromwell have to do with all of this?
Well, Cromwell himself is a strong Puritan, and Cromwell thought he was saving your soul, Alice.
So we're not allowed to have a lavish feast. What can we do to have fun? What can't we do to have fun?
We can't have very much fun. As soon as Parliament took over in London, it closed all the London theatres. Playing cards was a no. Dancing was a no. So it was hard to have a good time even if you did celebrate the feasts, because there wasn't a lot you could really do on them.
And I suppose ultimately the Puritans had the army to back them up.
Yes, Cromwell was a leading general, and like some third world dictators, was held in place by the fact that the army adored him, as they tend to adore successful generals. And as long as they did, nobody could really remove him.
I think it would have been terrifying, actually, to live under that regime.
Yeah, as a nation, we paid a terrible price for it.
Cromwell's puritanical philosophy extended into all aspects of everyday life, so it was hardly surprising that the Republic was not universally popular. Added to that, there was infighting between parliamentarians and the military, but for several years Cromwell was undeterred and held strong.
But then, in 1658, Oliver Cromwell died. And in a bizarre turn of events, almost as though this was a royal dynasty, he was succeeded by his son, Richard. And the army was not up for that. So the Republic was doomed to failure. Within a year, Richard had to step down as Lord Protector, and Charles II, the son of Charles I, was crowned king. The monarchy had been restored.
The radical experiment of the Puritan Republic had been too much for a traumatised nation. The country welcomed in the restoration of Charles II and the new hope it would bring, and there's a symbol of that right here in Oxford. The Sheldonian Theatre was completed in 1669 and is the official ceremonial hall for the university. It was designed by Sir Christopher Wren, who had studied at Oxford and was a professor at the university. He would, of course, go on to become one of the most famous architects in English history. Wren's family were staunch royalists, and there is definitely an anti-Puritan sentiment in the design of this building.
This theatre was designed deliberately to recall a Roman theatre of antiquity where the building would have been open to the elements with an awning that could be pulled over if it rained. But here we've got these cherubs, these little putti, pushing back that red fabric of the awning. So we see this incredible scene, towering clouds, in the centre of it all truth. And this is an allegorical painting. It's called Truth Descending on the Arts and Sciences to Expel Ignorance from the University. And this is by far the best way to look at it.
It seems only right that it is here in Oxford, a place that suffered so much during the Civil War, that there stands this monument to the Restoration, which also re-establishes Oxford as a prestigious centre of academic learning.
17th century was a time of revolution. A monarchy was replaced by a republic, but just for a brief time. Events turned full circle. We started with a king called Charles on the throne, and the story ends with a king called Charles on the throne. And Oxford saw it all.
During the turbulent years of the Civil War, Oxford would be transformed into a fortress to defend itself from attack. Its people would suffer the very worst effects of the war. But it was a city that ultimately survived to tell the tale, and despite the many traumas suffered here, Oxford prospers to this day.
If you want to understand the English Civil War and the impact it had on a nation, there is no better place to see that than Oxford.